As the Director of New Student and Leadership Programs, Mike organizes summer activities for new student orientation here at UC Irvine. He advises the orientation coordinators and volunteer staffers, co-advises the CHAMPS Peer Education Program out of the UCI Care office, and manages a number of student leadership programs, including Passport to Leadership and the Leadership Train, and he teaches a class on white identity and racial justice. Prior to his current appointment, Mike also worked for the Association of American Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Global Initiatives on a wide array of projects concerning campus diversity initiatives and civic engagement. And this is our fourth year having him as a keynote speaker at this event, so please join me in a warm welcome for Mike Knox.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Oh. Was that me? Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mandy, so much for the kind introduction. I'm really excited and still nervous, even though this is the fourth time to do this, but grateful for the opportunity. I want to just say thank you, first of all, to everybody who put this together. I know you all have been working really, really hard, and I'm so grateful for that work. It's such a service to the university, so thank you for that. Thank you to everybody who came out tonight. I think you being here, it says, still doing it, it says quite a bit about your character, so thank you for that and for being here. I'm going to start tonight with three things. Should I go on? No? I don't think I have anything on me that should be feeding back. I'm going to start with three things. First is a trigger warning. And Mandy did a great job with this already, but I'll just reiterate some of the things that I'll be talking about may be difficult to hear. Please know that there are a lot of people here who care very much about you and support you, and I invite you to do whatever it is you need to do to take care of yourselves throughout the talk. The second is a disclaimer. I'm going to try to discuss some things tonight about which I am definitely not an expert, and I'm likely going to make some mistakes along the way. I'm grateful for your patience, and I welcome your feedback and critique. And finally, I want to thank some folks who helped me in formulating and organizing my thoughts for tonight. I could speak at length about each one of them, but for the sake of time, I just want to say thank you. First to the amazing Nadika, who in less than a year has established herself as an indispensable and brilliant part of the UCI family, a champion for students and a trusted colleague and friend. I thought she was over there, but I can't find her now, so she's working somewhere. To all of the members of CHAMPS, and applications are available now. Please visit their booth later tonight and get one of those if you're interested. And in particular, I want to thank Cheon Falls for all he has done this last year to broaden my political imagination. I want to thank Johan Mosquera for a number of challenging and thought-provoking conversations over the last year, to Jade Turner, who has inspired and educated me both directly and indirectly, and to Sherwin Umali, who is one of the fiercest advocates for students on this campus and remains the most spectacularly amazing person in my life. So thank you. And while I recognize that he is not going to hear this personally, I want to give a huge shout out to Ta-Nehisi Coates for challenging me to be a better person every time I read his words. They've inspired a little bit about what I'm going to talk about tonight. So let's start. In the words of Lerone Bennett Jr., an educator in a system of oppression is either a revolutionary or an oppressor. Though I won't always succeed, I will endeavor tonight and at all times to be the former. I say that because I come to this work with an extremely privileged identity. My speaking to you tonight is an act of privilege. I won't be saying anything that hasn't been said before by countless women and transgender people, people of color, and other folks in our society whose voices have been marginalized throughout its history. I stand on the shoulders of these giants, and tonight I add my own voice, however imperfect and faltering, to their chorus. And because of my identity, I feel it's important to address the issue of privilege more broadly. Privilege is the unearned and largely unasked for benefits of society bestowed upon those of us in dominant social groups before we were even born. It's the ability to be normal, to go unquestioned, to live as an individual, and to know consciously or unconsciously that our perception of reality is objective where everyone else's is biased. Privilege is the ability of a man to express his sexuality and be cheered, while a woman who does the same is shamed. It's private photos stolen and distributed through the internet representing the moral failings of the woman who has been victimized, while the criminals who stole them walk free and blameless. It's my ability to navigate spaces comfortably, never having to devote a percentage of my brain to keeping myself safe or to warding off unwanted advances. Never facing accusations of friend zoning someone as if they were ever entitled to something more than that. Never having to think about keeping my hands in the right place or calculating the correct amount of eye contact to give law enforcement. Never having my existence or my right to be here questioned. Privilege is never having to consciously acknowledge that any of what I just described or the countless other examples even exists. It is incredibly difficult to recognize privilege when you have it. How, as they say, do you explain to a fish what water is? And when we do recognize it, it can be painful. We start to question who we are and whether or not we deserve to be where we are. It makes a position of dominance untenable as we begin to understand our connections to others. Because privilege relies on separation. Dominance demands disconnect. Privilege makes us forget our common humanity, as it must, lest the foundation upon which it is built fall apart. We forget the bargains that were struck to put us where we are, that for people to become white, they had to give up their identities as Irish or Italian or anything else. They had to forego their sense of community for the illusion of rugged individuality. They had to abandon their would-be friends and allies and trade for the sense of superiority of, well, at least I'm better off than them. For men to dominate women and folks of other gender identities and expressions, we had to forget that we are one. That gender is not two discrete ways of being, but a spectrum of identity and behavior that we chose to name and divide and enforce, brutally at times. Ultimately, to be men, we had to cut ourselves off even from ourselves, to deny our feelings, our capacity for tenderness and vulnerability and love. As men, we are taught to fear our true selves, to fear our emotions, to fear any want or desire that falls outside the narrow definition of man. And we're taught that even that fear we feel is shameful, and so we bury it inside and only let it out in the form of anger. We prove our masculinity to ourselves and to others by dominating, punishing, and intimidating men and boys and people of all gender identities who have the courage to refuse to conform. And while this props us up above others, deep down we know that we have lost something essential along the way. We know that in placing us on top of the social order, something was stolen from us. Our connections were traded away before we even took our first breath. We simultaneously fear and desire the connections we have lost. We fear them because they expose the lies upon which our comfort has been built, and covet them because we know they represent a deeper humanity than we have ever known. When we start to recognize our connections to others, the conscious or unconscious sense of our own superiority is shaken. We begin to understand that we merely stand at the highest point of a sinking ship. Our liberation and the liberation of those whom we have been taught to see as less human become one. When I recognize that I am inextricably linked to the Syrian refugee, to the woman who must formulate a safety plan to go out at night, to the trans person whose identity is denied and life put at risk through legislation and daily bigotry, to the black student whose presence on this very campus is questioned through looks and comments whispered and yelled, to the courageous survivors gathered here tonight, whose strength I can scarcely comprehend. When I recognize that my liberation is tied up in your liberation, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, that all forms of oppression put the oppressed at greater risk of violence and the oppressor at greater risk of losing that which makes us human. When I recognize these deeper truths, I have two choices. I can hide behind my privilege, rationalize away the reality in front of me, and retreat into xenophobia or colorblindness or men's rights. Or I can take action. I can look at the world as it is and declare that this is unacceptable. I can dedicate my life and my work to undoing the lies I have been taught that build barriers between us so that I might stand above you. There are those who argue that students today simply want to be coddled, that calls for trigger warnings and speech that respects humanity and safe spaces free of symbols of oppression, that these things are in fact just examples of political correctness run amok. They're the marks of a generation incapable of facing the harsh realities of the world. I say students demanding to be treated as fully human as you all are doing here tonight, in the face of a nation that has since its inception denied them that humanity, is extraordinarily courageous. Earlier this year, a group of students put together a demand that UCI remove police from the campus. I'm going to admit, my initial reaction to this demand was extreme skepticism. Of course, they aren't really asking for this, I thought. How could we possibly operate without police? What would happen when crime inevitably occurs? I've since, through patient conversation with folks who cared enough to help me understand, opted to ask different questions. Why would someone feel a world without police is better than the one we have now? Why would that make some people feel safer? Why is my impression of law enforcement so different from that of others? And beyond all that, what would it actually take to create a world in which everyone could truly feel safe and secure in their own bodies? You don't have to agree with the demand. There are certainly pieces of it with which I continue to struggle, but I believe it is the height of arrogance and privilege to dismiss it out of hand, as I did initially. When someone tells you they are in pain, the proper response is not, no, you aren't, or prove it, or your solutions just aren't realistic. And none of this is intended as an indictment of law enforcement. I know a number of police officers personally for whom I have nothing but respect and admiration. This is in fact an indictment of all of us. Despite the good intentions of the many, rampant sexual violence, racist police brutality, a deeply discriminatory justice system, and a horrifying prison industrial complex are the natural outcomes of a culture built upon a foundation of racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-blackness, and on and on. A culture unable or unwilling to face itself and to come to terms with the bad and ugly parts of its past and present. The system as it exists today is not broken, it's working as intended. It was designed to break and exploit black bodies, designed to put women in their place, designed to prop up the wealthy, white, male, cisgender, able-bodied U.S. citizen at the expense of all others. The continuation of oppression has nothing to do with whether or not anyone is a good person. Our many overlapping systems of oppression require no villains to operate, but merely good people unwilling or unable to believe that they are even real. We are a nation built upon the plunder of black bodies, having a longer history with slavery and Jim Crow than without them. A nation made possible through the genocide of indigenous people. A nation marked by Chinese exclusion, no Filipinos allowed signs, and Japanese internment. A nation in which a leading candidate for president can openly say that Mexican immigrants are criminals and rapists, and that Muslim people fleeing the horrors of war and terrorism are likely terrorists themselves. We're a nation confronted by mountains of evidence to the contrary, which chooses to insist that we solved our pesky racism problems long ago. That people demanding we recognize the fullness of their humanity are asking for special services and handouts and coddling. All it takes for oppression to stand is for good people to believe that rape culture isn't real, that feminists are simply man-haters, and after all, boys are just being boys. Violence is a means to maintain the status quo, to maintain power. And violence, as we know, extends beyond the physical. Violence is at home in the questions, what were you wearing? What did you go to that party for anyway? Why did you drink so much? Violence is the provision of services that protect some and control others. It's social policy that poisons water supplies. Violence is the subtle comments and looks that tell people you don't belong, you aren't good enough to be here, don't get too comfortable. And we know also that these small jabs, these microaggressions, they accumulate. They have very real impacts over time on the health and wellness of the people they target. The fact that so many students here who face these overlapping forms of violence and oppression succeed anyway, go on living and breathing and thriving in and out of the classroom, and many doing so while also fighting to end all forms of oppression, is nothing short of breathtaking. The voices that speak out against atrocity in the face of a world that marginalizes, threatens, imprisons, and kills them for doing so are the voices of our heroes, whether we acknowledge them or not. Whether we recognize or not that even as privileged people, they are fighting for our collective liberation and not only their own. When someone calls you out or calls you in, as the case may be, when they have the courage to say to you, something you have said or done has wounded me, they're giving you a gift. They're telling you first that you have the potential to say and do and be better, and second, that they care enough about you to risk their own vulnerability. And it's not to be taken personally. When any of us says or does something that reflects and reinforces our institutions of racism or sexism, homophobia or ableism, or any other form of oppression, again, that is society working as intended. It's not a reflection of who we are in our hearts, but a reflection of the extent to which the oppressive institutions around us have managed to damage and twist our true selves, to convince us that we are not connected. So in these moments, there's no need for guilt. We need not feel shame that we have unintentionally revealed the society in which we were brought up. It is the logical conclusion of a culture based in the dominance of some over others. Instead, we should appreciate the gift we have been given, as painful as it may be to receive, and use it to become more truly who we are and less who we have been taught to be. And for me, this means I must recognize that I am not in this struggle to save anyone but myself. When your humanity is diminished, my humanity is diminished. Your liberation is my liberation. So tonight and every night, when we talk about violence prevention, when we talk about taking back the night, let's be sure we are taking it back for everyone. If a trans body or a black body or a body with a disability or any other body is not seen as worthy of protecting, the fight is lost before it's begun. Violence prevention that fails to account for the intersectionality in our lives may broaden the scope of privilege, but it does nothing to end oppression. And this will be painful and difficult, as it will call on us to examine the ways in which our identities have been centralized at the expense of others. We'll be forced to ask ourselves, is my comfort worth your pain? Is my sense that the world is a just and fair place worth your life? We come here tonight to honor the voices of survivors, and also to say in one united voice, not one more. I believe in a world without violence, but to get there we must fully understand what violence means and remember that we rise and fall together. Thank you for allowing me to take this path with you. Thank you for all you do on behalf of our collective liberation, and thank you for having me here tonight. Thank you very much.